Welcome back to the Berg Podcast. Thanks for joining us today. With me today is Ford.
Hey, how's it going?
And Dan.
Hey, everybody.
And today we're talking about culture, and actually not specifically about culture, but a conversation we had recently, and we're just kind of huddled around the coffee table, but talking about how the common themes in our core values. And Dan, I think what started it was you and I were sort of talking about the ways, like when we know people are a good fit for our organization, and oftentimes you don't know for a while, right? We kind of have to feel it out, figure it out. But when we know people are a good fit for our organization, it's usually because they don't care about some of the things that seem to be on the fringes, right? And we talked about like people who really care about what their title is. Sometimes that might be a red flag that they're not going to be a great culture fit, because a lot of times the guys who are here for a long time or buy into what we're trying to do as an organization, a lot of times you could call them the janitor, but they're still gonna they take pride in their work, they take ownership of what they're doing, they show up, they do their job, and so I think we're just an extension of that conversation.
Yeah, Brian, you hit the nail on the head there with, if the title matters, it becomes like a leading indicator that we could have a concern, not because title doesn't matter, but because we developed and became, this what we are today with wearing lots of hats, and not just, Ford, you and I wearing lots of hats, the laborer wearing lots of hats, the operator wearing lots of hats. We always said, we weren't going to put people's names on track hose. We weren't going to go away from the operator laborer title as a job description, and all of that just, it keeps like hearkening back to what I think is central to our core values, which is people just come in and they do what needs to be done to get the work done. They just get it done, and you show up and you do your best and you work until it's complete, and then you move on to the next thing. And you don't really worry about whose job it is or whose responsibility it is or who's accountable. And that in itself creates the accountability and the effectiveness that allowed us to grow. Yeah. And so when I look at who the most successful people are here, and successful isn't, I'm not making a statement on job title. I'm not making a statement on, which vehicle you drive. I'm making a statement on who is the most impactful to our organization on a daily basis. And those people, regardless of what role they fill in the company, are people that just get it done. They just, and that you could ask them to do just about anything and they're going to go get it done for you and do it to the best of their ability. It may not be perfect because it might not be their thing, but they'll go get it done.
Yeah, what's interesting, and this might take us off on a little bit of a tangent, but
we're going off the tracks.
Well, it's related. It's related. It's a tangent, but we do. I think we do a fair amount of work to put words to what we believe our culture is, what we desire our culture to look like. Right. We did some work with identifying our core values, our mission, etc. And oftentimes, we have these conversations. And in fact, I was just talking about a podcast I heard the other day. Tasha from Sargent introduced me to it, called Construction Genius. But she, the gentleman was talking about, culture. Culture brings the people that you want, right? But it made me sort of think, like, does culture bring the people that we want, or does culture keep the people that we want here? And I don't know if we have the culture that we want because we found the right people, or if we found the right people because we had this established culture. Does that make sense? It's like
chicken or the egg thing?
Chicken and an egg kind of conversation.
Yeah, I feel like the filter, Brian. It's like a filter. It's the thing that we're evaluating on. It's one of the things that has made it hard in doing reviews, quite honestly, is none of us ever really desire to like lock into metrics. Like we do, in the sense of, we want to say like, okay, well, how are we going to evaluate success of the company, success of the person, success of the job? And we know, okay, we got to come up with a metrics that is fair that we can evaluate. But then we're like, okay, well, the metric says the answer is 5, but they did a great job. And there's all these outstanding things that you didn't realize that weren't incorporated in. And the people showed up early and the weather was bad. And we like, all of a sudden you put all these qualifiers and you sort of undermine your metrics at times. And I think that one of the way that relates here is we really put value in culture, which is really hard to put a metric on. You know what I mean? It's hard. We did work to come up with what they were.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of the things I always feel like you know it when it's there, but I have trouble telling you what it is. I just know when I see it.
Yeah.
Well, I think actually what you were saying, though, it's actually not a chicken or the egg. It's almost like a two-pronged piece.
Right.
Like you're hoping that what you put out there and present does funnel and clean out some people that aren't interested. But then you have to actually be part of the team and produce in the way that you said you wanted to, and then you see if they are a fit. So I don't like, it's not like one or the other. It's almost like, okay, hopefully people that look to join our team, they read about us and they say, hey, this is a place I want to be. But them wanting to be part of this team doesn't mean that they are the appropriate fit, even though they want to be part of the team.
We get a fair amount of employee referrals, which is really nice. I think that's like the highest compliment our employee could ever pay us is to say, I want someone that I know, trust, like to also work here because I believe it's a good company, right? In my opinion, that's probably one of the highest compliments they could ever give us is to ask someone else or tell someone else that this is a good place to work. And we do get a fair number of employee referrals. I think that's a reflection of good culture in those people, at least. What we don't always know is it the right culture for the people that we're bringing in, right? So, and that's where I kind of get like this, I think the culture is a reflection of our leadership, right? I think specifically Ford's upbringing, background have a heavy influence on our culture. I think that our culture is a reflection of the way we act as human beings, sort of like dig our heels in, work hard, get a job done, work till the job's finished, find creative ways to accomplish things or to overcome problems, etc. And I think we've done a fairly good job of verbalizing that in some of the things that we've done. I don't know. There's so much talk right now about, oh, you've got to have good culture. You've got to have good culture. And it just feels like a marketing buzzword. Like, hey, you'll get the people you want if you have the right culture, right? And I'm like, I don't know. I think what more often what we find, at least in my opinion, and I could be way off base here, but more often what we find is we get people because they think it's a good place to work or because they have been told our culture is good, but we keep people because we have good culture. I don't know.
Well, I would agree. And actually, just to jump back on that thing with the employee referral, it's been interesting to see how some of those go because some people, like I'll talk to a guy and he's like, he tried it once and maybe the person didn't work out. And it's like, we're not holding that's they did the thing to get him to the door. After that, that's on the person that they refer in. It's not back. Now, if someone's doing it multiple times and they're not bringing people, maybe they're not seeing the same thing. But other people are like, I'm not putting my name on that. And you're like, put your name out there. If you think it is a good fit, like get them to the door. And then that person has to do their own from there on out. They're not, they're not a latchkey kid that you have to be hooked to. I mean, hopefully you can guide them because they know who to deal with, that kind of stuff. But I've heard it sometimes from some people. They're just like, oh, I don't want, like, if this doesn't work out, I'm afraid it's going to be like a mark on my record. And it's like, no, that's not how this works. But at the same time, we're hoping that the team members that are here are editing for people that they feel would be a good fit, not just a guy they met last week or, we're expecting they know what's the inner workings are here. And so that they would say, hey, I feel that this person's a good fit because of X, not just, oh, and I went through my Rolodex and I found a couple people and said, hey, help them join the team because they probably won't be a long-term fits for us.
Yeah. Yeah. I had a thought, but I want to precursor. Ford said latchkeys, dating himself. I don't even know if that's legal anymore. I don't know if latchkey's a legal thing anymore. But on a serious note, as you were talking about what we want and what makes our culture and, Ford saying the two-pronged thing, that sort of what came to mind is, when they said a saying about you, like, work hard, play hard, right? And you say like, okay, but that's a difficult thing to balance, right? Like, and we do that with like, we want to get the job done. We want people who are going to whether it be in our jobs or our snow or the weather, they're like, they're gonna dig their heels in and they're gonna get this done. And then we say we want work-life balance. And you say, okay, well, how are you gonna balance those two? And that becomes, I think, like the gray area of our culture that sometimes people struggle with. Is we see it also with, I think, autonomy and guidance. That someone says like, I really want to work in a place that has autonomy, that allows me to be engaged and empowered and go do what I want to do to help the company, because they've been in a place where they were micromanaged. And then they arrive and they're like, in principle, they love the idea of being empowered, but without very structured guidance, they don't feel supported, or they're not properly, I don't want to say incentivized because that makes it like a money or a pay thing, but they're not able to set their own goal and incentivize themselves to say, I need to get from point A to point B and establish a plan. So I think that's one of the times when you see people come in, like you're saying, because they want to be a part of the culture, but they may not actually be a culture fit because they can't actually function in that environment very well. They feel unsettled, and all people are, people are different. You don't have to be one way. We talk about it all the time. Brian likes formality in the sense of you like to have, here's how we make decisions. Here's how the rules. It's just it just is what it is.
Right.
I would never say I don't like formality. I just like the freedom to be able to make decisions, which by definition means I don't like formality. Right. So, but I wouldn't say, you know what I mean? Like in the thinking, but yet you and I operate perfectly together, I think, because we understand the parameters that each of us like to make decisions, and we can both make good decisions. And your formality helps me. And I think my lack of formality, my ability to adjust, helps you at times to say like, okay, well, we could do this instead. Let's just adjust, And that speaks to our culture, that when you can find people who are willing to just do their piece and get the job done, then they realize like, okay, well, if all of us are willing to do that, then everybody can have the time they need and the space to be able to then have a work-life balance.
Yeah.
Well, I think there's two words here that like are challenging. You just said, I mean, with the three words, but two phrases that are so heavily used: culture and work-life balance.
Oh.
Because there is no true definition of either one of those. And so that really becomes down to a personal definition. And that's where it gets challenging, because what someone thinks of as work-life balance, someone else doesn't think that. Or someone thinks culture is foosball tables and chicken wings on Fridays is what they determined if they think. So like when we use the word culture, we're defining, again, as you said, it's hard to put a number scale on it, right? Because
it's funny. We start with like, we get back to the very beginning of, you start with like a farmer mentality. Like, let's just get the job done. I mean, Shay the other day, Ford, he said something to me. We were having a conversation, and I think I shared this with Brian. And Shay said something. I am not going to get it right with what he said, but I can get the gist. And he said, one of the keys he thinks to succeeding here is you have to be the type of person that when you are given a responsibility, you have to take all of that responsibility. He said, like when I went to Longwood, nobody said, this is what you have to do. They didn't say like, you need to do these 5 things to be successful.
Right.
They said, or he was talking to me, he said, you said, I have to come to Longwood and I have to help us be in a better spot. We have to get to a point where we're performing the job successfully and we get the job to the end and the client and the owner are happy. That's a very broad description of what I needed him to do, but Shay's 100% right. That is what I said. And so Shay said, okay, anything that comes along that needs to be done and managed, that's going to be my responsibility. And so how do you put a job description on that? And I think like, there becomes your chicken or egg thing. Like we create job descriptions, but then we don't want them to limit anyone. Like in other words, if you're the laborer, but you think there's a better way to do something and you have a way to explain why that's the better way, then tell the operator and the foreman, I think we could do it this way. You could have the best way. And so let's do it that way.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that ties into part of like how you win here, because, there's a saying out there that, I don't know, there's a name behind it. I'll find it someday, probably 10 years after we do this. But, people get promoted to one position past their skill set or their expertise or something like that. That's just kind of like a thing. And, here sometimes we let people start doing things and then kind of come along and be like, hey, you're doing that. We can see you're doing that. And then you're going to get that position versus putting someone that doesn't know that into that position, and then them having challenges in the ability to perform the way that they're supposed to. We've had that with a couple of people. You're like, hey, we're seeing that they're doing stuff that's beyond what maybe they traditionally were supposed to do. We see that they're being successful at that, so we can elevate them versus the other way around of like, we think they might be able to with no reference point and then have an issue going backwards. But back to the culture thing, like, what is culture, and like, what is work-life balance? And, each person, in the trades in general, not just us but, there is a work-life balance, but it's not a weekly balance.
Well, one of you said it a minute or two ago about like, and you're talking about a little bit right now, Ford, like the perception of what that means. And one of you guys said like, hey, like, this is what we believe. So it kind of looks like, but some other people, it might not be right for, right? And that's one thing that I think we've gotten better at recognizing. Like we've had some failures where we brought in people that we thought were going to be a great fit. And it just wasn't right for them. Right. And we took it personally. We're like, dang, like, do we need to change something? Did we mess up? And there have been times where it probably was a reflection of both parties, us, the employee, et cetera. But there have been times where it's like, well, this is kind of who we are, and not everyone fits, and that's okay. It's hard to admit or acknowledge sometimes. Not everyone fits, and it's interesting because I think we all grew up in similar situations from like an expectation of who you are as a kid and how you behave, and we grew up with dads who sort of reflected, I think, this nature. Like you go to work, you get the job done, you work 9, 10, 11 hours, whatever it took to work. And I think that's a reflection of, to some extent, who we are and how we work. And what's interesting for me, and I just have experienced this recently, right? I've got a son who's doing a co-op program, and he's working remotely for a company out of the greater Philadelphia area. And I think he's doing a really good job. And I'm biased, I'm his dad. But what's been interesting to me is I have like a very interesting perspective, or different perspective of what work-life balance is, or what my role with work is, right? And that's why working in the office is really good for me. When I work remotely, I just feel like it's so distracting. I'm like, there's too much other stuff that is or could be happening. He loves it. He might like, he'll start working at 7 a.m. and he might still be working at 10 p.m. But in the middle, he went to the gym. He met a friend for lunch. Like that's his perfect work-life balance. And his employer's fine with it because he got the work done. He was at all the meetings he was supposed to be at. He's meeting his deadlines, his timelines. He's exceeding expectations. Their version of work-life balance is you can be like, somehow intermingle work and life at the same time, making both commitments work to your pleasure. And if that means that you're comfortable working at 7 a.m. and you're comfortable working at 10 p.m. and you're getting your job done, awesome. We don't have that luxury in our industry, and for the most part, right?
Nope. Butts are in the seats. That's how this works.
Right. So if people don't show up or decide like, hey, I'd like to go meet a friend for lunch and go to the gym for 3 hours in the middle of the day, typically our schedules can't and don't accommodate that. And so people looking for that type of work-life balance or that flexibility or freedom, it's not going to be a good fit because we're not going to be able to afford them that. We're not going to be able to accommodate that schedule. Our clients won't tolerate us if we try. And so I think that's where that difference in perspective would say, we do it right for some people, for a lot of people, but we don't do it right for everybody.
Well, that, and I think it's also about intentionality with your time. I don't know. Some people equate volumes of time to being what they're looking for in that balance, as you say. And I don't know that the volume of time is always as valuable as the intentionality of the time that you have to do the things that you're looking to do. We have a slower season, so there's more flexibility during that season. But in the go season, there's not that. So, it's just, I know I'm always aggravated that my calendar runs my life. It seems like it's like, okay, well, I got 4 things I got to do in this order today. But like part of that is being that, okay, during those off times, I can do those other things and try and use them as intentional as possible. So it might not be balanced hour wise to the same like balance, but it is like, okay, when I have this time, I'm going to do X versus whatever else it might be. And so that's how I create my own personal work-life balance, is more to the intentional use of the time I do have versus, oh, well, I spent 60 hours at the office this week and only 4 hours doing this. It's like, yeah, but I got that stuff done and I got this stuff done. So to me, that is a balance. So it's a personal way of understanding that, I think.
Yeah.
You know what, too, is I think especially between the three of us, right, is you end up in this ironic spot, or at least I do. And, you can chime in if you agree or you don't. But Ford likes to be in the office, right? I mean, like, he, now with the girls have run out a little more than he used to, but Ford likes to be in the office. So even though Ford is not at all tracking, what I'm doing, where I'm going, what I have to talk to, he's, as he said, it's quality. It's, am I producing? Are we being who we need to be for this company to run? But I'm still cognizant of when Ford's around. You know what I mean? And you're like, okay, well, Ford sets a really high bar for what Ford thinks work-life balance is. He just, historically he has. Ford works a lot of hours, and so for me, naturally, I tend to work a lot of hours. You're the same way. You tend to work a lot of hours. So it works. But it begs the question of like a funny word, balance. Like we make balance that it is balanced. You know what I mean? That like balance is 50-50. And that's not what balance means. Balance means there's a balance. It can be an imbalance. And so like work-life balance has come to mean, I think people come to interpret it in a way that's not what we mean. What we mean, I think back to growing up and I mean, my dad worked 70 hours a week, every week. You know what I mean? Like that was happening. He was in construction. That's what he did, and that was the reality. And he wasn't around for a lot of things. And that was the reality of my dad's work-life balance, and in this industry, historically, that is the way it is. People are working 70 hours, and so when you do that, and then in this industry, you try and talk about work-life balance, you're not talking about the same thing as people who work 40-hour, 9-to-5 work weeks with a full lunch break. And well, that's a pretty even balance. You know what I mean? But in our world, what if it rains? What if it snows? What if something needs to be done? What if there's an emergency? All these things can impact how many hours you work. And so for me, work-life balance becomes a bigger picture balance.
Yeah.
It's, are we trying to respect people's space? If they have something that their kids are doing, can we say, you go do that thing and we can allow for that. We're going to cover for that, And I mean, the parental leave is a big example of that. Like we don't know exactly how that's going to play out in terms of how we cover those things. But what we say is we looked at it and it wasn't that way for any of us or for many of our guys whose kids are older and grown up. But why don't we try and make it that way to give a little bit more balance? What does that balance? It doesn't mean that you did something once and something else once. It just means we're trying to make space for you to be a more complete person of who you want to be. And at different times in your life, that could look very different. You know what I mean? When you have the 19, 22-year-old kid who's just getting into the workforce and, is trying to put away money to in a best case scenario, trying to put away money so they can get themselves a car or get a house, or, they want to get married, or, in a best case scenario. Or you have a person who's in their 40s and they have kids who are, playing sports or doing dance or singing or, whatever, and they want to be involved there. Or somebody who's in their 60s and their kids are grown up and now they're going to work more again. You know what I mean? I'm thinking of balance as like a
lifetime, not a weekly, monthly thing, right?
Yeah. You know what I mean? And that's how we talk about it all the time. Yeah. One of the hardest conversions we have is when we convert a really solid employee from an hourly waged employee to a salary employee. And Brian, I genuinely think I try to do as good a job as I can at giving a fair number that represents the work that they have done over the past 5 years and where I anticipate they will be for the next 30, and say, I'm going to pay you the same. We're just going to be able to amortize that and know what it is, and you're not going to have to worry about it. But when we do that, it's almost inevitable that at some point soon after that, either it gets too busy, which was always what happened before, or this year, I had 2 different of our really quality guys come to me and said, I feel like I'm stealing right now because it's not snowing. and it's winter and it's miserable, so we can't really work. And I mean, I sat at home yesterday. Like, is there something I can go? Like, they almost wanted to just get on a treadmill and run.
Mhm.
You know what I mean? Because like, I got to stay busy. Like, you're paying me, and it's like, no. Yes, it's hard to have a payroll when the weather's not allowing you to work. But as I said to them, the work will come. It's always here. And in the dead of summer, you're going to work more than you might like. You know what I mean? Because on a week, because that's what's going to happen. So let's not take a snapshot of what work-life balance is. Let's instead look at it at like work-life balance. You're going to work in a perfect world. People are going to work here for 30, 40 years.
Yeah.
And they're going to live for, 70, 80, 90, whatever years. So that's what we're trying to balance. And that becomes a big part of our culture, because that is what we're talking about. You know what I mean? I had a conversation Ford the other day, and then I'll let Ford, he was going to jump in there, I had a conversation at Longwood, and I called Ford. I don't even think Brian knows this. I knew coming into it, Longwood was going to try and push for us to work on Sundays because they want to catch up. And I said, Ford, listen, I think I have to take a stand here. And you have always taken the stand that for religious reasons and our beliefs, we are not going to work Sundays. And I said, are you comfortable with me taking that stand? And he said, yeah, that's where we are. I said, okay. And I presented them with a plan for how we could work a similar amount of hours in the window, avoiding weather, looking and trying to do it. And I just said, but Sundays are a no-go. We are not going to work on Sundays, because that's part of that balance, whether people realize it or not, or realize that it's an active component of us telling people.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I was thinking back to like the microcosms, and I think it also it ties into your work, because some people, they equate hours to functionality, and what I said about being very specific with my time. But if you're as productive as you can be, it will reduce the amount of time that you need to be at work.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that could affect your paycheck, but if you get work done, you get to do the next piece of work. That's how this goes. And so spending more time on the job site and not trying to be as productive as you can, it actually hurts yourself as much as it helps yourself, because it's taking more time away from other things that you might be interested in doing in that balance piece. So there is actually some benefits to being as productive during your work hours, because then it actually allows for time to do other things.
Yeah.
You know what comes to mind real quick as Ford says that, Brian, is we talk about all the times, like if you have an hour worth of work left and it's late and everybody's tired, but you leave and you got to come back and finish that hour. Many times, if you really looked big picture, the reason that we're working a Saturday is because we needed to get something done. But could you have done it in a window that you probably wouldn't have noticed? You know what I mean? Because if you're as productive as you can be, yes, it reduces the amount of hours, and maybe you only get 50 hours instead of 55 hours. But that's how you have those 5 hours for yourself. Like, in other words, we don't bid and we don't project manage to work 60 hours a week. Like, we bid and we project manage to work 50 hours a week. Now, I'm not going to sit here and lie and say we plan to work 40. That's never been true. In a perfect world, I'd like great weather and we work 5 10s and we're super productive and everybody's happy. But when stuff gets stretched out because of weather or things, that starts to impact things. But that's where the team needs to try and, step up even a little more and say, like, if we do a little bit more today and we do that, 4 times, we'll be where we need to be by Friday.
Mm-hmm.
But somehow jumped off the rails again.
Yeah, I don't know.
We started
using those code words that I think I started
culture,
seeing
we
around all the
got
businesses.
to productivity.
Yeah, to
and
productivity.
I don't know if they're the same thing, but
But we're
that's
honest to ourselves. I mean, that's the truth, Brian. I feel like that. Like, I think our culture is represented. I think if you really look at those cultures, those items, the core values, it gets to just go to work, get work done, and then, you know what I mean? And let's take care of each other and get to a better spot and all be able to enjoy what we want to enjoy at work and outside of work. And that's who we want to be.
Well, I think, this takes another tangent, but those words, those code words that we've just been talking about that everybody uses, a lot of that is based on large businesses because they haven't done stuff. So now they're trying to create and manufacture something. And I think what took us so much time to put words to what we think is important to us was challenging because it was just stuff we did.
Right.
Like, how do you, like, you don't define it. It gets done, like,
That's a good point. We weren't
and
trying to create a culture. We
No.
had a culture.
we had a
We just
culture.
wanted to be able to describe it.
Right.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And so, these other companies that maybe didn't have anything, they're trying to manufacture and make this because it's become the new thing that everybody wants. Whereas in the smaller companies, it's there. It's just they aren't going to spend the time to try and create something. It's just you work with the people, you see how they work, and you join in or you don't join in. That's how it really boils down to.
Mhm.
And so, it's a work in progress because you're always trying to refine it and make it into slicker language or an easier way to read it or something like that,
Yeah.
so people don't take the wrong perspective on it. But it's always been there. It's just more of how do you describe it if someone was asking you about it.
No, that's a great point. And that's probably a good place to wrap it up. So thanks for joining us today, folks. We hope you got something from this, and we hope that you join us again on another episode.